but also unlocking really critical species diversity so we can achieve more holistic restoration for the reefs. We've got an incredible team, advisors, partners, and a global restoration community that is fighting to ensure that the ecosystems that sustain all of us everywhere will survive for generations to come.
The sculpture at a park is a question mark that now you're compelled to want to answer. Maybe not answer with an answer, but answer with a question. I created the underwater as a way of helping my neighbors understand their vulnerability to rising seas. I did that by creating a series of public art projects and installations that help map the topography of Miami, which is a very flat space. And they can then make yard signs and put them in front of their homes so that they can begin to tell their neighbors that everyone up and down that block is vulnerable to rising seas.
This is the material that I love. We're using aggregate that is recycled aggregate. Instead of using fresh water, we're using seawater. And instead of using only Portland cement, we're using supplemental cementitious material.
You see this number at a park, you can scan the QR code and finally you understand what this number 6 is about. This number 6 means that your park is at 6 feet above sea level, which means that your home across the street is also at 6 feet above sea level. Through art, we created 287 pathways, 270 venues and 287 parks, 287 points where community can understand. With a high carbon concrete, you can build it with this. Why is this happening to us? What can we do about it?
Yes. Can we go? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. First of all, I would like to thank the UAE Pavilion and the organizer for the UAE Pavilion specifically in bringing us here today in UAE National Day. I'm here as Abdullah Shahi, Head of Strategic Research, working at the UAE Space Agency, and I'm a National Expert Program Fellow from the 3rd cohort. A program was established by His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, the President of UAE. With me here today, Andrew Zali, Chief Impact Officer from Planet Labs. And we are here today to discuss and share with you some highlights of the UAE's achievement and how space will play a vital role in supporting climate change. Maybe I'll ask my speaker here today, Andrew, to give us a highlight why space is important and how does it support climate change and what does it mean for space to be here at COP28.
Wonderful. Thank you, Abdullah. And hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you today. As was mentioned, as Abdullah introduced us, myself, I'm Andrew Zali. I'm the Chief Impact Officer of an organization called Planet. We are best known for having designed and built and operating the largest constellation of Earth-observing satellites in history in a giant ring around the Earth. So if you can imagine, if I can use Abdullah as a prop for a moment, imagine Abdullah is the sun, here's the Earth, spinning around on a daily basis. Our organization has put hundreds of satellites into orbit in a ring around the Earth, from the North Pole down over the equator to the South Pole. And as the satellites spin this way and the Earth turns this way, these hundreds of satellites image the entire surface of the Earth, the land surface of the Earth and the near oceans, every day in high resolution. So how many people here are astronauts, if I may ask for a show of hands? Any astronauts in the audience? I wish to be. Intention. That's right. So the answer is not that there are no astronauts, it's that there are not yet any astronauts, because we'll all eventually get to go. But for those of you who are not astronauts, and I myself am not an astronaut, that means every place you've ever been, we've taken a picture of at roughly lunchtime, roughly noontime. And so we've been doing that every day for the last, well, every day since the middle of 2017, and then a little less frequently before that. What would you do if you had the ability, if we could give you the magical ability to see everywhere on the earth, what would such a power be useful for? Well, one of the most important things it's useful for, as Abdullah asked in his question, is about climate change. Because we see every tree, every building, every road, we see every act of deforestation, every flood, the growth of every crop in every field. And we can see things like the surface of the temperature of the surface of the earth, how much water is in the soil, which is an incredibly important indicator for how crops are going to grow, for instance. And in an era when climate change is changing the amount of heat that we have and drying out some of our soils, when it's making other parts of our country, our world wetter, when it's making us more likely to have extreme typhoons and floods and storm damage and all the other consequences of climate change, being able to monitor the whole Earth every day is important for two reasons. One is it allows us to understand the baseline rate of risk that we have and to understand it in very high resolution. And the other one that is really important is that using the tools of artificial intelligence along with all of this data allows us to predict where risks are going to emerge tomorrow. So this is dealing with the effects of climate change and being able to hold up a kind of mirror to the whole planet was really why our organization was founded.
Thank you, Andrew, for the explanation how space is important. And as you are aware, COP has strategic pillars that is touched on adaptation, mitigation, loss, and damage. And we had great news and achievement for COP28 presidency during the first day and the achievement for loss and damage. How space play a vital role in loss and damage, and how we can use the space as a tool for early warning system.
I really appreciate that. Let me just say, it's an incredible thing to see the commitment on the first day of the COP to loss and damage, and it's led by the UAE. That is an extraordinary thing to see, and something we hope all the governments, my own included, follow up with much more robustly. So let's talk about loss and damage for a moment. I think everyone here knows that through no fault of their own, some of the most climate vulnerable countries are those that have had no contribution or virtually no contribution to historical rates of climate emission. So they're not responsible for the situation we find ourselves in, nor do they have the resources often to adapt to the complexities of climate change. And there's another problem as well, and that is that, unfortunately, in the world, when you have expensive tools, those expensive tools are often pointed or used in places where most of the wealth is. So, there are places in my country that get a lot more attention, for example, than places in the global south. Now, one of the reasons that that's important to note is that fully half of the climate, what we call the essential climate indicators, the essential climate variables, half of them are only monitorable with space-based technologies, with this kind of remote sensing. And the powerful thing about tools, and I'll speak to Planet, but this is not just unique to Planet. This is what the UAE Space Agency is doing. It's what all the national new space agencies and existing ones are doing, what all the new space entrepreneurs are doing, is these satellites, they look at Beverly Hills and Borneo and Bangladesh with the same frequency and resolution. They don't distinguish between one place or another. And in so doing, they help close the gap between the places that get a lot of attention and the places that get less attention. And that's critically important because these countries that we're talking about here, if you take the 30 countries, for instance, that are on the United Nations Early Warning Systems for All initiative, the priority countries, those countries don't get the same level of technological investment and attention. And the satellite tools, I think, are critical for helping understand things like food security and the threats of extreme weather and risks to assets, to physical assets from things like wildfires. All of those kinds of things we can see and monitor and model from space.
Thank you, Andrew. This comes to my next question, specifically for UAE and enabling the ecosystem, the startup companies to work on loss and damage. There is a partnership that we work together. I just want to highlight how do you see involvement of other vulnerable countries who don't have access to data, and how can UAE and the startup companies here work with vulnerable countries to enable them to ensure they have access to data and support their countries with the climate change?
Well, I think everyone here at the COP, if any of you have been to anything at the COP, and everyone in here has, you know that this is an all-together now moment. That is, we need the public sector and the private sector, and not just big established organizations in the public sector, I'm sorry, the private sector, but we need a whole entrepreneurial wave of innovation. We need all of our minds and incentives aligned to addressing these challenges together, and to say nothing of all the NGOs and the national governments of all the countries, particularly the most vulnerable to climate change. So one of the things we're proudest of is our work with you, actually. I will say we've been working, we're in the middle of our first year of a pilot program focused on loss and damage. We decided to work together in Maldives to open up Planet's data repository to enable new kinds of applications for understanding climate risk, for monitoring loss and damage, for giving countries not only the opportunity to mitigate some of those risks, but also to advocate for the right kinds of climate finance as we build the kinds of funds that have been announced here at COP28. So what's really exciting, though, is not just providing data to another government, even a government that's deserving and that is ready and that is that needs the resource, the technical resource and technical assistance. But the other part of the story, and this is the thing I'm so excited about, is that we've been working together to ensure that startup organizations here in the Emirates have access to the same tools, because we think there are going to be enterprises that scale up to be able to address these kind of foundational questions. So we're really excited to see that ecosystem start to form. This is technology entrepreneurship in furtherance of and supporting active climate change for the most vulnerable, right? And that means you get economic development, and we get effective climate action in the same gesture. It was really exciting.
Thank you, Andrew. I think time is running short. I just have last question from my side regarding the operationalizing the loss and damage fund. Space is a tool, and there are also other tools, but specifically when it comes to space, how can we verify these data that we get from space? I know certain technologies, AI can give you a certain proximity, but then how can we verify these data of measuring loss and damage specific countries, and how space can, embedded with AI, can support?
Well, it's a great question, Abdullah. There really are two convergent trends here. One is we've begun to build a system that allows us to monitor everywhere on the Earth every day and to produce these vast sums of data. But those sums of data are irrelevant. They would be unusable except to the most obscure scientist or technical actor if we didn't actually leverage the power of AI to extract indicators. So we're working in the context of both kind of the working loss and damage atlas that we're working on, and with the Early Warning Systems for All initiative, to be able to apply these tools of AI to help validate and verify what we see. So for instance, a good example of this is we're working on things like using machine learning and population data to build the most sophisticated population maps in existence. That's really important because many places that are subject to loss and damage haven't been counted. You know, there are cities, if you take the third largest city in Niger, which I learned was named Zinder. It's a city that hasn't been measured actually since the last census in 2012, and we think it's growing about 5 or 6% a year. But with satellite data and AI, we can actually conduct a kind of virtual census from space and see exactly where people are living in such a way that we can better understand who's at risk to those kinds of effects of heat waves and climate change and the like. So we think that this act of data diplomacy, that providing this data and AI diplomacy is going to be essential for catalyzing the right kinds of outcomes and making sure that the assets, the financial assets that go into the loss and damage fund are targeted to the places where they can really do the most good.
Thank you, Andrew. Indeed, the space play a vital role in supporting climate initiative. It's not only about going to space and astronaut. There is immense data that we get from space. And now I'd like to ask if any of the attendants have a question to ask before we wrap up. Seems like
All right. Yes.
Your Excellency.
Thank you so much, both of you, for this amazing session. And we are very proud of our youth, so we are very excited to have you with Andrew in this session. And I'm going to ask this question because I think it's important for everybody to understand. And it's something that I heard from you when we had the discussions at the World Economic Forum sessions, when you said one of the core challenges is how people manage to use those tools.
Yeah.
So if you can speak a little bit more about that, and what do you mean by it, and how we can fix that, because that's definitely one of the core challenges of an actual use of, of those amazing tools. So if we can maybe shed a little bit more light about that, would be great. Thank you.
It's a great question and a generous question. I'd like to invite you all to reflect for a moment on what made the company Google so successful. Well, the first thing they did was they came up with a clever way to index all the information on the World Wide Web. And if that is all they did, then if you wanted to use Google, you would go down to the library and you would ask a technical person to type in commands to a complicated piece of software that no human being could use to access that index of the internet, and maybe they would come back with a group of printouts. And for a long time, that's where this kind of data has been. It's been the provenance of very technical people who have to have a lot of training, often PhDs in geospatial data to do this kind of work. But of course, that isn't the story of Google, because the other part that they did was they put that index behind the easiest to use user interface you can imagine. You just type something in, and if you don't get it, you type something else in, and you don't get it, you keep going, and in a search or two, you find what you're looking for. Well, this data, these tools, are undergoing that moment right now. So today, one of the most powerful applications of artificial intelligence is to allow us to ask questions of this information in plain language. So instead of having to have a PhD, my metric is, could my 83-year-old mother ask a question about the Earth and what's happening on the Earth and get an answer in the same way that she asks questions of Google on a regular basis? And that is coming right now. We're about to see this transformational moment when all of us have access to information about what's happening on the Earth. And that's critically important because many of the places where we want this information to have the greatest impact have the least ability to, quote unquote, adapt technologically to the availability of the resource unless we put that interface in place. And that's a big part of the integration of this data with AI. And I'm very excited to say it's happening right now, literally in front of our eyes. It's happening week by week and month by month right now.
Thank you, Andrew. This also reminds me of a concept that was created. There might be in the future climate GPT that you just need to type how to predict certain areas might be in the future based on real data that's coming from the satellites.
Yeah. We see every act of deforestation, for instance, as it's occurring. And we've had some really interesting success plugging that deforestation data into a thing like ChatGPT and then asking it where the next act of deforestation is likely to occur. And it turns out that it's actually pretty good at telling us where the next act of deforestation, for reasons that we can't entirely understand at the moment. So that should tell you something about AI.
Thank you, Andrew, and we'd like to thank the audience and the participants for our session today. This wraps up our meeting. Thank you. Thank you.
That was wonderful.
Thanks so much.
Hold on. Oh, hold on. You and me, Abdullah. You're the handsome one, remember?
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Okay, one more. I have to turn sideways so I look skinnier.
I think they can Photoshop it.
Yeah, they can. Thanks.
الله
That
يعافيك
was
ويحفظك.
great.
مشكور جزاكم الله خير. الله يسعدك. مشكور على الفرصة.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great. You were
No.
perfect.
Thank you.
Yes, every day. Yes, exactly.
ساعتك
Well,
مشكورين جزاكم الله خير.
the pixels are very.